Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Earlier today, Prime Minister Imran Khan went to Muzaffarabad, the capital of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and addressed a rally on the issue of India's atrocities in occupied Kashmir following India's annexation of Indian-occupied Kashmir. At the rally, he said that Pakistan will urge the United Nations to not just take note of India's actions, but to act, and instead of talking the talk, start walking the talk. He reiterated that he will act as ambassador for the oppressed Kashmiris and will raise the issue there in his UNGA speech. To assess Pakistan's diplomatic efforts so far and how effective Pakistan has been, we are joined by Ms. Rabbani Khar, the former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Ambassador Riyaz joins us from Islamabad studios, and Mr. Riyazul Khaliq, who is a research associate and PhD candidate at one of the universities in Turkey. Thank you to all the guests. Let's begin with Ms. Khar here. Those who are criticizing India are actually criticizing India for what they consider as rights violations of the Kashmiris, but not really focusing on the fact that the Kashmiris do not want to stay within India. So these are two different things. And I think we, at least from what I've gathered from our side, that we haven't really picked up this subtlety. And I think one of the things that we need to tell the world is that the issue of rights violations is flowing from the very fact that India is oppressing the Kashmiris because Kashmiris do not want to stay with India.
Absolutely. No, again, I could not agree with you more, but because you also have to be very mindful of the fact that the demand in the world, or the world's reaction, and here I'm talking non-state world, okay, I'm talking about the intelligence, okay, I'm talking about the intellectuals, I'm talking about editorials, newspaper items, and news-creating items, right? Will be more towards human rights violations and their reaction to what Modi has done in the last 40 days. And let's do the territorial issue, because the territorial issue is not a new issue. It's been there since 1947, and it's it's something that the world has gotten used to.
There's been a lot of pomp and sort of bluster, and the substance hasn't really much come through. Whether it was Modi's going to on the sidelines of the G7 summit or meeting with President Putin one-on-one, etc., etc. He hasn't really been able to sell what he has done.
He has not, sorry, say that again, he's not paying the consequences, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't really, no one has actually come out and said that it's okay, it's your internal matter. Everyone is saying, well, you need to look into this. There's a lot of, for once, I think, a lot of noise in the international media also in terms of rights violations, in terms of the communications blackout, and the rest of it.
Okay. I think we need to be slightly, I am at least going to be slightly more nuanced about it, and I think you're absolutely on the right sort of track in trying to follow this, but is that their reaction of the world has been on human rights violations and everything else. But if you look at positions of countries and their leaders, it has been pretty much mirroring what Modi wants them to say, which is that please settle this problem at the bilateral level, not at the international level. No country important enough, or countries that we had thought we had gotten decent statements out of, including Trump's statement of being a mediator, sitting right next to Prime Minister Modi, he clearly then said, oh, I'm there, if you don't need me. And he said, no, we don't need you. And he said, okay, fine. The point being that you have to be mindful of the fact that India's place in the world, despite the human rights violation, people will speak out the human rights violation, and that too very selectively. If you look at spokespersons or ministries of foreign affairs or state as in leadership level, many of these statements have not come out, even on the human rights violation level. If you look at organizations level, human rights organizations, other watches, articles, yes, that's happening. So let's try and, I think if you want to really do an assessment of where our strategy should be focused right now, I think it should be much more focused on trying to ensure that you create a pressure group. Again, I have said this before also, there are countries in the world, including countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey, and a few others, these are just at the top of my, who have territorial issues of their own and who are bent towards you. You obviously have the Republic.
Absolutely, and we need to exploit that. Absolutely, we need to exploit that.
Group within the Muslim world and outside of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Hina Rabbani Khar speaking with us, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Ambassador Bukhari, once again, the subtlety, the understanding that the world is wherever and whenever it's concerned about human rights violations, communications blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir. But no one is really latching on to the fact that all of that actually flows from a much more central problem, and that is the problem of Kashmiris' total alienation and the denial of their right to self-determination. Do you think we have been able to really convey that or play on that?
I was listening to our former Foreign Minister, Madam Hina Rabbani Khar. She is right when she says that we need to do more. But I would add over here that since 5th of July of August, we have done a lot. We have covered a lot. It started from President Trump's reiteration that he was still available for mediation. And then we had 2 foreign ministers coming here in Islamabad to discuss the issue relating to the Indian-occupied Kashmir. Then we had, issue being discussed in the European Union, in the OIC, statements by the UN Secretary General. Then recently, the statement by UN Human Rights Commission. These all are encouraging signs, but we need to do more. How we will do that? Our foreign minister has already undertaken a large number of bilateral calls with his counterparts all over the world. The thing is to impress upon the people, to share with the people the atrocities being committed by the Indian law enforcement agencies in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This will really, take some time for our friends, for the international world, to understand the real problem being faced by the people of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Once, as the Human Rights Council has called upon India to relax the restrictions imposed upon the people of Kashmir. Once the people start coming out and will start demanding, their right, their exercise, the right to self-determination, and their opposition to what was done on 5th of August to them. Then people will realize the real issue, the depth of the issue, that people will not be satisfied just with the relaxation of rules, but something more. And then, the UN General Assembly session is coming, by the end of this month. Our Prime Minister is going over there. And as, we heard today that he has, taken the responsibility to act as an ambassador.
Ambassador, talking of the UNGA, upcoming UNGA speeches, there's obviously going to be a spat there. We also know that the Indian NSA, Mr. Dowell, has been briefing everyone ahead of the UNGA in terms of the journalists, people who will be going there, what are the questions that are likely to be raised, how to respond to what Pakistan says, etc., etc. So, are you sure that we are also prepared and do we understand that the Indians will be well entrenched and well prepared, and that we need to be very slick about how we break through their defenses?
Yeah, we need to do. We need to send our people over there to counter the Indian propaganda, the Indian moves, at all levels, including the, on the sidelines of the UNGA. We need to hold our bilateral meetings with the concerned heads of delegations. We need to send our, intellectuals abroad, not even to UNGA, but to other important capitals, to share what Pakistan feels, what Pakistan wants to do, what are the real issues being faced by the Indian, the people of Indian occupied Kashmir. We need to do that, and I hope our government will address that soon, before it becomes too late.
Okay. Let me pull in Mr. Riyaz Khaliq. Mr. Khaliq, what do you make of the situation? And do you really think, and I began on that question, whether a rally in Muzaffarabad is actually something that's going to be effective in terms of Pakistan's diplomatic offensive against India?
Thank you, Mr. Haider, for having me on the show. The thing is that rallies, of course, are important. They have their own importance. But it is since August 5 that Pakistan and Pakistani leadership have been doing this, that sending its foreign minister to different visits. The thing is that Pakistani diplomats must have got it where they lagged behind. Is it just Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan shot out many tweets urging international community to act on Kashmir, but until now, what I believe is that this is what international could have done. You have Senator Lindsey Graham, who is seen and who is supposed to be one of the strongest lawmakers in US,
and very close to President Trump.
President Trump, who, if reports are true, meets him one-on-one every week. When he writes a letter and seeking attention by President Trump, this is what
along with four other senators.
Along with four other senators. Why I mentioned Senator Graham is because of the importance he has, influence he yields. What I'm saying is that since the end, due to that international pressure, the statements which have been coming out, India has accepted and said this, okay, we are ready for bilateral dialogue, bilateral talks.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Riyaz Bukhari and Mr. Riyaz Khaliq for speaking with us. We're going to take a short break and return to discuss Pakistan's role in the wake of the US decision post 9/11 to attack Afghanistan and wage a war on terror. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. In an interview to Russian television channel Russia Today, Prime Minister Imran Khan has said that Pakistan made a mistake by joining the US war on terror. Here's what he said.
We lost, as I said, over $100 billion to the economy. And in the end, we were blamed for the Americans not succeeding in Afghanistan. I felt it was very unfair on Pakistan.
Hindsight, as we say, is 20/20. Did Pakistan have a choice? Is it easy to criticize the decisions taken 18 years ago? Were there other choices available to Pakistan? To answer these questions, we have with us Mr. Khurshid Kasuri, a former foreign minister of Pakistan, Lieutenant General Tariq Waseem Ghazi, a former corps commander and former defense secretary. Let me quickly start with Mr. Kasuri. Mr. Kasuri, at that time, you were the foreign minister. Were there other choices available to Pakistan? Or is it because now, 18 years forward, so we can look back and we can say that we did this right and that wrong?
First of all, I was not the foreign minister. Mr. Abdul Sattar was. And in order to find out the situation, you have to read Mr. Abdul Sattar's book, which I've read, which I'm sure you may have forgotten the contents, but I have not. In fact, he goes on to describe the situation there. First of all, the whole world was lining up. The United Nations Security Council, the European Union, NATO, and Islamic countries. And even India was dying to give bases to United States. So Pakistan's choices were very limited. And in fact, the Secretary of State Colin Powell, this is what Mr. Abdul Sattar reports, and I think has been subsequently borne out by other interviews that I have read, left very little choice. Secretary of State Colin Powell, he rang not just Pakistan. Of course, the call to Pakistan could have a more menacing meaning, but he rang some other countries and said it's time for them to choose. The famous expression, are you with us or against us? It may have been used later on, but Mr. Colin Powell, whom I dealt with, was far too sophisticated to use such language, but he implied exactly the same. He asked people to choose. And Pakistan was particularly vulnerable because Pakistan was the only country in the world at that time who had recognized Pakistan. But the only one that had an ambassador at that time, 9/11, was Pakistan. So it was then Afghanistan was a landlocked country, and the whole world knew that Afghanistan depended on Pakistan. So as far as Khan Sahib is concerned, Prime Minister Imran Khan, his stand has been consistent. It's not that he's changed the story. He said the same thing when he was not in power, which he has now said. So, but I think people who were present at that time would be in a position to find out, to actually tell you whether they had a choice. Mr. Abdul Sattar thinks they had no choice. In fact, later on it became known that, we conceded more than what even the Americans asked for.
Absolutely.
To hear these stories.
Absolutely.
Mr. Sattar, in his book, gives the details of what was asked
Mr. Kasuri,
for, what
Mr.
he had
Kasuri,
already preempted, and what Pakistan
Mr. Kasuri, can you hear me?
It was less than what the Americans had asked for.
Mr. Kasuri, can you hear me? Let me clarify.
Yes, I can.
Let me clarify. I retain enough memory to remember that you were not the foreign minister in late 2001. My reference to your being the foreign minister was in relation to the large part of the 2000s when this war was going on. So that's point number one. And yes, I have read the late Mr. Abdul Sattar's book. And yes, most of the people who were writing at that time were of the opinion that perhaps there was no other choice. But the allied question is, as I said in my opening, that if we accept that there was no other choice, then can we say that even if we had gone along with the US, that we could have gotten a better deal?
You see, it's always people who are outside the government, not only at that particular time. I remember that when Pakistan facilitated the dialogue between China and the United States, everybody thought General Yahya and his regime had goofed up and we could have got a much better deal. Now, everybody seems to feel that you could have got a better deal. People think that Ziaul Haq could have got a better deal. Those who are present understand the situation much better than those who are outside. When I was foreign minister, I thought we'd got as good a deal as possible, but the critics were saying, no, they could have done better. It's more or less the situation now when you have the opposition saying, oh, Imran Khan has failed on Kashmir and we could have done much better. In fact, I was in a meeting the other day and some of the opposition people with me, I gave them a piece of paper and I said, please write on it what you'd like Prime Minister Imran Khan to do.
Or what you could have possibly done. Absolutely. I take your point, and that's a fair point. Thank you so much. That was former Foreign Minister, Mr. Khurshid Kasuri, speaking with us. Coming to General Ghazi. General Ghazi, as a very senior military officer and also as the former Defense Secretary, who had a larger overview, not just of the military's operational side, but also the Ministry of Defense, the defense policy itself. What is your take on what Prime Minister Khan has said with reference to the choice that we made?
Okay, I think the first thing we need to understand is that there have been certain seminal events in the geopolitics around the world that have defined the rules under which the world behaves. Whether they were pre or post World War, pre or post UN, with pre or post Cold War, whether it was pre or post 9/11. And this particular moment was just one seminal event that actually redefined the parameters under which the world was going to operate. There was a chance and an opportunity that came our way. And I am a witness because I was the only one sitting with General Pervez Musharraf as the 9/11 towers were hit. The moment the second tower was hit and they came down, I was the only one, so I was aware of what was going on at that time in the mine. And I was also aware of what happened thereafter, because on the 13th we had the co-commanders conference and I was a participant in that, and certain decisions were taken. So essentially what was later on called the U-turn or the about turn or whatever, against the Taliban recognition and the support for the coalition was taken in these 2 days. Now, let us also understand that the events occurred in a particular environment. That environment was of that particular time. It is not of today. And therefore, like you say, you know, it's nice to look at it in the kind of a hindsight. But if I look back, and I can share with you that my view at that time also was that we have an opportunity to get back on the right side of the history. Because at that time, if you remember, we were, as Kasuri Sahab also said, one of the 3 countries that had recognized the Taliban government, that was actually extending our neck for them. We were batting for them. We were justifying activities for them. And what were we getting in return? They were involved in terrorist activities and harboring criminals that the world considered criminals. And we were justifying those for them. They did not even listen to us when we said, look, give up on these people. And if you can't hand them over because of whatever tribal customs you have, then the least you can do is to prevent them from acting against world peace, because it's going to cause trouble to you and to us. They did not even listen to that. They also did not listen to us when we tried to intercede on behalf of the world to save the statues at Bamiyan, the Buddha statues in Bamiyan. And we were able to try and, negotiate with them. We were able to tell them that, look, you are living in the backyard with these Buddha statues in the backyard of what Mahmud Ghaznavi lived. And he had to go, thousands of miles down south, 17 times to raid and destroy idols over there. And in his own backyard, he allowed these to happen. They didn't even listen. They didn't even care for what you thought or what the world thought. So they let us down. We had no leverage with them. And therefore, I do remember raising this issue at the co-commanders conference. And I told, it was my view at that time, and I still hold on to it, that yes, it was an opportunity that was God-given to us to reverse and to get on the right side of history. So that's as far as the question with regard to whether it was a mistake or otherwise. Now, yes, the Prime Minister has very eloquently put forward the Pakistani viewpoint that there is unfair blame cast on us. Now, when you say unfair blame, you then have to put it again in a context. Is this unfair blame for the failure of the coalition or the US forces or the world community in Afghanistan on Pakistan's shoulders as a complete and total blame? Or is Pakistan required to only share a part of this blame? That is also at the doorsteps of the US, it's also at the doorstep of the coalition, it's also at the doorstep of the Afghan government, it is also at the doorstep of some of the local politics in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and at the doorstep of so many. Yes, if you say that we also had a share of that blame, yes, we did our share, but we were unable to prevent it being labeled as our exclusive blame. And that is where I disagree. Now, it is also, I think in that clip that you showed, the Prime Minister has also talked about us not having sided with the coalition, but having been neutral.
Yeah.
With all due respect, I must say that this is being very naive. What is neutral? Pakistan was not even neutral in a Sri Lankan conflict.
General Ghazi, sir, hold that thought, because I have a question in relation to that, and I will return to you. But I'm also by Ambassador Salman Bashir, our former Foreign Secretary. Ambassador Bashir, we were talking about Mr. Khan's interview to Russia today, where he talked about the fact that Pakistan really damaged itself by siding with the US coalition. And as General Ghazi was saying, that his thought that we could have been neutral is something that is not really particularly smart or naive, as General Ghazi said. Now, as a diplomat and also as someone who dealt through lots of these unfolding events, not at that particular time, but later, what are your thoughts about what our choices were?
I think it's time that we sort of got out of this. The Prime Minister is correct. Well, we took upon ourselves greater burdens that we ought to have. But then that was the moment, and those were the decisions that seemed to the leadership at that time to be in our national interest. I remember even at that, in those years, actually, there were many in the foreign ministry who did not really agree with what we were doing. That is the support that we were giving to the Afghan jihad against the Soviets. There were consequences of that, and of course, what was being mentioned earlier about the Taliban. Now, Taliban, I think it is historically a total fallacy that the whole story of the Taliban and some of the literature that has been there for a while, especially after 9/11, which talks of, the nexus between Pakistan and Taliban.
I get your point, Ambassador Bashir. I mean, the issue really is that there are moments you don't have the luxury of looking into the future and looking into basically figuring out all the consequences. So it's much easier to sort of look back and say, well, you got that wrong and that right. But thank you so much for being with us. Quickly back to General Ghazi. General Ghazi, sir, before I let you go, the point that I wanted to make was that supposing we had told the US that, sorry, we cannot be part of your coalition. Supposing also that the US had not extracted any penalties from us for that decision, do you think that we could still have not had this, the areas on both sides of the western border as conflict zones with people coming from west to east and going east to west to fight the US-led coalition? Because that has been the tradition in this area.
Yeah, I think that is a question that is, something that one can say and debate for hours altogether, because it didn't happen. Now, in terms of opinions, how does it matter? If we had said no, you think that there would have been no war in Afghanistan? It was going to take place. The Americans and the world had decided to do so. It would have gone ahead with or without you. Now, which side would you have wanted to be, with or without? Now, how would they have gone in? Now, a lot of people end up saying, no, they couldn't have done it without the logistic lines that were available through Pakistan. That is not true. They had logistic lines that were offered to them by India, by Tajikistan, through Chahabahar, through their air bases in Tajikistan, Fodor, which was declined after Pakistan had accepted the logistic support missions that were to be conducted for the operations in Afghanistan. So that was one option that was available. It would have taken them a little longer to build up.
Absolutely.
It would have taken them more cost, but they could also have done other things. They could have landed an initial invasion force within Afghanistan, built up those staging bases for themselves. They could have also gone in and captured territory within Pakistan, and from those staging bases done. Now, in that event, You tell me, what would Pakistan's choice have been?
Absolutely, absolutely. I get your point. Lieutenant General Waseem Ghazi was speaking with us. Thank you so much, sir, for your insights, both of the overview and also as a military person. We are now joined by Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who is Associate Vice President of South Asia Center at the USIP. Moeed, thank you for being on the program. In his interview to Russia Today, Prime Minister Imran Khan says that Pakistan damaged itself by agreeing to become part of the US war on terror. In terms of the war we fought inside Pakistan and the lives lost, as he puts it. Is he right?
Look, I mean, hindsight is 2020. So if you've got to think through the pre-9/11 and post-9/11 Pakistan, I don't think this is rocket science. I mean, clearly Pakistan has lost a lot, 70,000 and counting in terms of casualties. There's billions of dollars. But that said, at the time with President George Bush, the US president, talking about with us or against us, I think it's a fairly difficult call to make, whether you turn your back to the world's only superpower who's already accusing you of being in cahoots and in bed with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But as the record goes, the past 18 years, certainly there's been tremendous losses in the region. And of course, Pakistan bearing the brunt of it.
At the time, the US decided to attack Afghanistan and presumably told Pakistan that we were either with them or against them. Did Pakistan have a realistic option to tell the US that this would wreak havoc here and we couldn't be part of this?
Ejaz, I remember this must have been 2002 or 3. There was a press conference that then Chief Executive Musharraf and President Musharraf actually led with journalists. And I believe you were part of this, if you can recall, where he really candidly talked about the fact that on the one hand, he is being pressured to send troops into FATA. If he does, he fears a major backlash. On the other hand, you've got the world superpower breathing down your neck, asking you to do that and to support the US against Taliban and Al-Qaeda and actually fight against the fighters who were crossing over the Afghan border into Pakistan. Remember, the first ask of the US was to take care of and go after the people who were entering erstwhile FATA and send troops for that. Now, that was a big move, but it was very clear from that statement and some other developments at the time that he and his team knew that this could create a major backlash. So the backlash did come. Whether it was managed as well as one could have, I don't think so. But again, we are looking retrospectively and in hindsight. So, yes, I mean, I think there were other ways of doing it. If you ask me today, Colin Powell famously said that, I gave a list to Pakistan and I was hoping that they would, accept part of it, and Pakistan went overboard and they accepted everything and more. So there were ways to do it, definitely. But I think there was a lot of pressure as well. We can't discount that.
If, in theory, Pakistan had chosen to stay out of the conflict, and if, assuming that the US had let it be, and all of this is in theory, do you think Pakistan could have avoided the conflict that cross-border activity could have generated anyway, given tribal affiliations and a porous border, and also a history of this area?
No, I don't think so. Look, I mean, the spillover was inevitable. The border we talk about, as we know, it's only now that we've begun to fence it, but it was completely porous. And at the time, you had so many affiliations in the tribal areas going back to the 80s, the Afghan jihad. There was a lot of sympathy for the Taliban, definitely, if not other militant groups. So no, the spillover would have happened. And where else would these people have run after the US attacked Afghanistan? Of course, they wouldn't come here. That was going to happen no matter what. Now, whether this would have translated into a Pakistani Taliban TTP kind of reaction and the mayhem we saw after that, I think that's where the difference may have been. If Pakistan had done this on its own terms, if Pakistan would have done this on its own time, I don't think we would have had the kind of reaction that came from the locals, which then, of course, miscreants, criminals, like the TTP used to create the group that they did and the sort of attacks that followed. So I think there was definitely a way for Pakistan to take control itself and do it differently. But the spillover, I think, would have happened. There's no way to isolate Pakistan from Afghanistan. And quite frankly, I'll tell you, this is my worry. With the recent turn of events, with the US president pulling out of talks, if that continues to be the case, if there's a complete breakdown, you're going to see a big civil war in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, the spillover is going to come to Pakistan again.
One of the vexing questions, and it's especially vexing for us in Pakistan, the US has been constantly saying it gave Pakistan $32 billion US dollars over more than a decade and a half, and yet Pakistan did not deliver. Pakistan, as Prime Minister Khan argues, or in the Russia Today interview, damaged itself tremendously by being part of the US coalition. So there are two completely different and competing narratives here. Where does the truth lie? Can one even talk about the idea of truth in a situation that developed post 9/11?
Well, 32 billion or 16 billion or whatever. The only casualty in these kind of situations is the truth. There is no truth. We don't know what the truth is. Nobody will ever know what the truth is. This is a game of narratives. This is a battle of perspectives. Who wins, who loses depends on whose narrative actually becomes stronger. You go to the US and all you hear is, oh, look at this, ungrateful Pakistan, taken all this money and hasn't done anything for us. Pakistan, of course, has a narrative. It says, look at the losses we've had, look at the kind of sacrifices we've made, what else do you want? I have for long argued, Ejaz, one, there isn't much point debating where the truth lies, because actually perspectives on both sides are so opposed to each other. There's no meeting of the minds that's possible here. It doesn't suit the two sides to actually do that. The other part of this, I think, is important, which is that there's been a major communication breakdown between the US and Pakistan. And I'm not talking about not having conversations. I'm talking about for 17 years, both sides not understanding the other's culture of communication. The US saying do more and Pakistan feeling insulted. Pakistan explaining what's going on and the nuances, and the US thinking that Pakistan is lying. There is a real problem of communication in this relationship. Both sides speak in the language that their own system understands. They don't realize how different the other one is. That's where part of the problem has been. But as far as Pakistan's losses are concerned, look, there are no two ways. I mean, it's just empirical. You can look around and you can see. What the number is, we can debate, but that fact remains intact.
Finally, Moeed, now that President Trump is disengaged with the Taliban, just as there was to be a deal, do you think we should say adieu to whatever transpired between Trump and Khan when Khan visited the White House?
So it's true that Afghanistan is a big reason for why the visit by Prime Minister Imran Khan went as well as it did. That said, let me just challenge the premise of the question. I am not entirely sure that the talks with the Taliban are done and dusted. Look, I mean, the bottom line for President Trump has always been that he wants to go into the November 2020 election saying that he's ended another war, the American boys have come home. That reality has not changed. And so, to me, he's going to come back to this. He's going to be made to come back. Pakistan's going to try. Others are going to try. The Taliban gained nothing by going back to the battlefield in full force. The only two actors who may have gained are President Ashraf Ghani, who would have been done, quite frankly, if the interim government setup would have come up. That was part of the deal. And India, who does not want a peace deal and wants the US to stay there, as long as possible. And so, at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure this is over. Definitely, precious time is going to be lost. I wish this hadn't happened, but I'm not losing hope. Because if we go in the way that it seems now, i.e. no more talks, Afghanistan is going to descend into total chaos.
I agree with you that the talks are not dead, even though President Trump has said actually, used this term that they are dead. I think they're going to get back to the table. But thank you, Moeed, for being on the program. This is all for today, but before we wrap up, let me just note that, interestingly, the House Foreign Affairs Committee has actually summoned Ambassador Khalilzad to come before the committee and explain to the committee on 19 September why the talks failed. This will be a very interesting moment, and we'll have to see how Ambassador Khalilzad plays this, because Can he actually say, well, we are very close to the deal and we're going to sign on the dotted line, but it was President Trump who pulled the rug from under everyone's feet? Or whether he's going to be a little more diplomatic about the entire thing, but it will be worth watching. This is all for this week from Indus Special. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.